What's up, guys? Demius3D here with another video update on my EQ Redone project. The music that you just heard is actually a redone musical score for the original Everquest soundtrack. It's done by a dude named David McMichael, and he did about 20 different soundtracks. He redid about 20 different soundtracks and uploaded them online and then shared his creations with everybody online on the, I want to say the Project 1999 subreddit. I'm pretty sure about it. Regardless, I'm going to provide a link in the description so you guys can have access to it, listen to it. He did a really awesome job, so David, thank you very much for providing me permission to use them. And also, thank you for the offer to do Black Burrow. I know I didn't respond to you, so if you're watching this video, absolutely. I think everybody would love to hear a Black Burrow remake. The Black Burrow theme song didn't really stick out in my mind, being so many years ago that I had played. I didn't really think of Black Burrow as having really prominent music, but it absolutely does. It does have that kind of weird, subtle music that just all of a sudden kind of snaps in and gives you that weird, creepy, eerie feeling every once in a while. And it's really, yeah, it would be really cool if you redid that, and I'm sure everybody would appreciate it. So great job, man. Thanks for letting me use it. Totally unrelated, but my cat just walked across my desk and shut my entire operation down with a single teeny tiny 1.5" paw step. She walked across my power strip, shut off my power button, and shut my entire workstation down. Everything went off, and everything is plugged into the same power strip. My monitors, my Cintiq tablet, everything is all kind of hooked into one, so everything just came humming down, and I got shut down for a brief period of time. I only lost probably about 30 minutes of work, but I save often enough for it to not really be an issue. But so thank you, Reese's, for that. We're gonna move right along here. Also, while we're on the topic of kind of equipment and production quality, as you can see, I've kind of relocated my microphone. It's standing in this kind of weird position right now. I just attached it to a microphone stand left over from my kids' video game. This is from an old Rock Band video game microphone stand, so it's left out in the garage. Figured I'd put it to good use, get it off of my desk, because as it was sitting on my desk on this little stand here, every time I would touch my desk, it would thump the microphone and make an awful sound, and I would have to either retake the video or just leave it in. Also, in terms, while we're on the topic of video editing, the video production quality, I'm going to try to increase it a little bit. I'm going to use maybe After Effects and Premiere and all of the fancy little video production tool sets that I have available to me, just to up the quality a little bit, maybe increase the production quality and presentation quality of all of these videos. So regarding the videos, the way that the new format is going to work, I've kind of nailed down a more kind of, I guess, structured format for the videos that I'm going to be making here and putting on YouTube. There's going to be kind of a technical side, and there's going to be a presentation side. So I want to create an atmosphere where when you come to the channel, you can see that work is still being done. Even though if I only did it in kind of a presentation format, it would, you know, I fear that too many people would think like, oh, there hasn't been an update in like 3 months. He must have abandoned it. And I don't want that to happen. So every once in a while, I'm going to try to come up with... At first, when I first thought about it, I thought, okay, maybe weekly or bi-weekly updates. But sometimes the process of creating assets takes so long, even for just a single asset, can take a long enough period of time where if I'm doing that, then I'm really just kind of giving you fluff. And I don't want to give you fluff. I want to give you stuff that is going to maybe be useful or inspiring to those that want to do something similar, right? But I also understand that there are a certain amount of viewers that are going to see this and just want to see the updates. They're just going to want to see the presentation. Show us when it's done, right? So for those people, I want to create just presentation videos that aren't going to get too technical, that aren't going to make it too overbearing for the people that just want to see it redone, just the fans of the series, of the franchise. They just want to see the finished product. So I'm going to have those videos. Those are going to be presentation videos, and they will have presentation in the title, right? Or, yeah, I'll say, we'll call it now. We'll say I'm going to put presentation in the title. Zone presentation for Everquest Redone, or EQ Redone. But then there's going to be the kind of intermittent videos in between those presentation videos that are going to contain the technical information from development on the art side, from the very first steps on creating an asset to the finished product, or where it'll be finished in the end of that video, right? So for a model, we might start with just the very beginnings of kind of developing the model, kind of like this video will have. You're about to see. It'll just start with the very beginnings of how I made the model, the kind of base mesh, all the way to the import process to UE4. For this video, I'm not going to go crazy about showing the texture side of the house, because it's going to be PBR textures, and I want to I'm still perfecting it. I'm still perfecting the way that I want to have these textures displayed. I don't want to I want to make a tileable texture, and in order to do that, I feel like I'm kind of constrained to Photoshop. I could use Substance Designer, but for some stuff, man, I'm not really I'd rather not use Substance Designer. I'd rather have a hand-painted kind of look. So I'm going to create a tileable texture. You can see, you'll see the tileable texture that I have. It's the same one that I showed in the first video, and that's just kind of a placeholder kind of texture of the direction I want to take it. It's going to look much the same, but it's going to be, like I say, PBR is going to have the roughness, the metallic, and all of the components of a PBR texture. So I need to develop those in Photoshop, and I'm not going to show that in this video, because that's probably going to be a video that I may dedicate completely to just texturing. So that's pretty much what this video is going to contain. That's the new format that this whole process is going to take, and enjoy. Okay, so we're just going to start with the original islands here that I have, the kind of foundational islands that I'm rebuilding here. And I have 4 of them created right now. I'm going to create the 5th one and show you the process from kind of start to finish, what that's going to look like, what the workflow for that's going to look like. So I'm going to make a live surface out of the original geometry and use the Maya Quad Draw feature to kind of overlay, almost trace new geometry on top of the old geometry, so that I can throw away the old geometry and use all the new stuff. So what I'm going to do is just basically trace the foundation layer first, the foundation ring of polys around this first island, making sure to pay careful attention to how far out the base goes, because that's probably the most important in my view right now, because that's the part of the model, these giant cliffs, that the player is going to have the most interaction with. So you don't want to encroach on the path too much and make it too small, or make it too much of a different angle or any of that stuff. So I'm making sure that I keep that as true to the original as possible. We're going to soften some of the edges, of course, but where the collision is going to be important. So now that we've got the first layer done, now I can kind of go through and be a little quicker about it. So now we're just going to kind of almost strip all of this kind of by strip, start laying the rest of these rings down, paying more attention to now where to add more polys. So on some of the more harsher, where these cliff shelves are almost, we're going to add a little bit more polys there after everything is complete, and to lessen the degree of harshness that you see as it silhouettes the sky. So the entire time that I'm doing this with the thought in mind that I want to keep the original silhouette just about the same. Where there was a peak, there's going to be a peak. Now that peak may look a little bit different, because it's going to be, have a higher quality look to it, a little bit more polys, or maybe less degree of harshness, but we're going to try to keep that as close to the original as possible. So I'm just going to go through here and finish this one up. As I've got this whole island completed here, what I'll do is kind of match it up to what I have already. First, I want to make sure I clean it up because sometimes there's a stray vertex that I'll leave and I won't notice it or whatever. So we're going to clean up the geometry first. Then we're going to go through and check all the faces, make sure there are no manifold faces or non-manifold faces, and just make sure everything is okay. Set the pivot to ground level, snap it up to where my new geometry is, and give it a double check to make sure that I'm not going to be missing any faces. So as I kind of re-enable the materials here, what you'll see is very harsh edges. Everything looks very harsh, right? It's because the normals aren't smooth. So I'm just going to go through real quick and smooth all the edges real quick. There's that cleanup. Soften edge. And now I'm basically checking the silhouette to make sure that it meets. Oh, there is the hole. There's always a hole. There's always one hole for for quad draw. So I'm going to fill that in with the pen to poly tool and smooth it out again. And go ahead and kind of check the way that this is silhouetting. If you look at the other ones, I've kind of smoothed out the way that this is going to silhouette against the sky. So basically, I want to keep that same look. So I'm just going to go through here, pick the Maya sculpting tool, and do a couple smooth edges, and kind of push-pull some of these edges to have a less degree of harshness. So we're just going to go through there real quick, speed that up for you, and smooth all the rest of this out. Just about done here, and it looks okay. A good place to start, anyways. If we need to make changes, we can certainly do so further down the line here, but it's a good place to start and begin to map our UVs and see what our texture is going to look like wrapped around this. Obviously, where some of these edges are going to meet the ground level, they're not going to meet the ground quite yet, and we're going to worry about that when we start doing the ground level. We're going to probably work the ground up to the geo, or we might just pull a couple of vertices, vertices down to the ground level, or just below it. Alright, UVs, everybody's favorite part of 3D modeling. So UVs, for those of you that don't know, basically allow you to texture a 2D map on top of a 3D surface, right? So the 3D surface needs to be stretched out in a way that is conducive to a 3D or a 2D texture map being mapped on top of it. So that requires a little bit of finagling. However, first, if you notice, I'm looking at the model right now and I see that there is a kind of piece that is jutting out and is really low poly. So since that's kind of a high profile part of this piece of geometry, it's going to have a lot of traffic through it, right? There's going to be, the player's going to constantly see that, so I'd rather not have it look like a low poly knife edge. So I'm just going to go through it here real quick and add some additional polygons using the multi-cut feature of Maya, and make it a little higher res. Alright, and it looks like I'm just about done here, and it looks like I got a decent surface that I'm gonna go with. A little bit higher res, a little softer profile, a little softer silhouette. So now I'm gonna move back on to UVing and start laying out these sections piece by piece, and then stitch them all together. So right now I'm doing something called a camera projection to map these UVs. I could do it a number of different ways, but for this, it shows just camera face projection UV layout, just because it's kind of a little easier than using something like Hedis, pelt mapping, or that type of thing. It just I really wanted to keep that base. That base level needs to be straight because like I said earlier, it's gonna have uh, a high degree of player interaction. The player's always gonna be looking at that, so those textures really need to stay horizontal, not wobble around a lot. So it would require a little bit more finagling if I did like a pelt map and then just relied on the software to kind of stretch out the textile density to where it thinks it should be as an average. So just gonna use this method. As you can see, I'm kind of just piecing all these out and laying them outside of 0 to 1 space, and then we're gonna stitch them all back together. And done with the layout portion here. Now basically what you'll see is I'm just bringing these edges a little bit closer. For all these pieces that I've kind of segmented out, I'm just bringing a little bit closer and enabling the Maya compression preview. Basically, it's just almost like a heat map where it shows you where the texture is going to be compressed versus where it's going to be stretched out a little bit. So even though part of it is off the screen here, you can still see kind of there's pink areas and blue areas. So basically those pink areas represent where or red areas represent where the texture is going to be stretched out across your surface and is going to look not correct. Conversely, the blue areas are where the texture is going to be squeezed in and compressed just too much. So what you want is a small degree of variance between the faces. You don't want to go from one dark extreme to a light extreme face to face. You want to kind of even it out and ease that transition a little bit. So as you can see right here, I froze the bottom UVs so that I can kind of let the Maya's unfold kind of figure out the best average for textile density. And as I'm kind of previewing this right now, I'm looking for areas that are going to have grid squares that are larger than the other ones, or unsightly seams. Looks like I ended up with a pretty good UV layout there. I'm going to preview the texture that I kind of made. This was just a really quick texture that I did in Photoshop. Darken the values a little bit. This is going to be something like what the end product is going to be, except for this is just a diffuse and normal map. So like I say, everything seems like it spans perfectly horizontal across the entire surface. It's seamless except for one seam. All I'm doing right here is just basically repeating the UVs a couple more times so I can, rather than enlarge the whole UV set, I'm just going to tile it 2 more times so that I can see what it would look like with a bit more layers on it. So that looks good. We're going to export it to UE4 next. Alright, basically I just imported some FBXs into UE4. I didn't really separate anything out. I just kind of lumped everything into one single FBX for the stuff for the new geometry. On the left, you see the old Everfrost Peaks and the old geometry. Obviously, no textures, missing textures, and there's all kinds of. It looks really jaggy, and the normals are kind of flying in every which direction. But I'm just using that as a reference point. Also, I should make note that you're going to see some crazy looking shadows on the new geometry that aren't going to be there in the final product. So essentially what we have in this scene here is just one single light source, which is the sun, and it's kind of casting some really heavy shadows on the undersides of a lot of these things, making them look really, really bad. So in the end, what'll happen is we'll do something called we'll do a light bake, and we'll add obviously kind of fill lights, right? You'll add like I'll add like a small ambient fill light, which will have like a blue tone to kind of take on the shadows. It'll kind of enrich the shadow color a little bit, as well as global illumination. Once we have some sort of light mapping done and all the models are ready to be baked, I'll bake it and account for global illumination. Global illumination will kind of fill in some ambient light. So All this is basically right now, the only reason I'm doing this is to try to get a good feel for where the geometry is going to be from the player perspective. So we'll drop the player in real quick. I already kind of have a little dude here at the entrance to what would be the entrance to Blackborough. And all I'm doing is making sure the geometry that I'm creating right now is going to silhouette properly from the player's perspective. So throughout the process, this is going to be something that I'm going to constantly do. I'll get a few pieces of assets or a few assets done. I'll import it, and then I'll just run a quick check to make sure that everything's looking good from the player's perspective. These are just some really quick and dirty props that I added to break up the kind of straight edges that you'll see, and kind of break that plane a little bit, add a little bit of visual interest. So those are going to get some good, nice looking textures. Probably in some areas we're going to have to alter the geometry. Like I don't like this point right here, that looks really silly. So we're obviously going to have to make some improvements there, right? And that's what this whole process is about. Because sometimes you don't notice stuff like that inside of your 3D modeling package. It really helps to kind of bring it back in and see, where. Because sometimes you can get away with stuff like that, depending on the way that it's going to be angled or what it's going to look like. Where it's going to be inside the engine. Sometimes you can get away with kind of jaggy little areas. It just depends on the model itself and its placement in the game world. So yeah, these snow drifts, obviously they don't have a texture. This kind of put a white material on them to kind of make it look like just snow drifts. And already we can kind of identify some areas that we're going to need to focus on. Some of these areas, like this first snowdrift placement up here, I don't like the fact that it has this kind of this bulgy area here, and it kind of protrudes outward. Actually, that may work. Depends. We're gonna have to add a secondary light source here and see what that looks like without such a heavy shadow there, because the heavy shadows are really screwing with the look of some of these things. But overall, I think as far as the geometry and the way that it's silhouetting and the way that it's looking, I think we're moving in a positive direction. I think this is going to be it's going to go all right. Everything's the methods seem sound. Everything seems good, and we won't truly get a good feel for how everything is going to truly work until we start doing some kind of preview light baking and adding in tertiary props and that type of thing. Already I can see that these snowdrifts are going to come out a little too wide for this area. Let's take a look at that little area right there in the actual original geometry. So right here we have that first island where it meets this island. So I'm calling them islands, but they're really just kind of cliff. So they're cliff areas. Right, so it looks like yeah, we brought those snowdrifts out a little far. We're gonna have to alter the size of those and make sure that we don't choke off this little path area right here. We do have a lot of kind of if you look at it in the original, this is the original geometry. Right around that same corner, we're gonna have kind of these weird jaggy edges, right? And the way that I kind of plan on incorporating that same terrain, those same terrain features, is by building them into snowdrifts. That's even though this was really kind of an artifact of the original sculpting process, because it was dealing with kind of pulling a lot of, you're asking a whole lot from not very much geometry, and they really kind of brought those cliffs way further out than they probably should have. Well, if that wasn't their intention, that was probably their intention, because it looks like those were kind of intended to be like, wow, we can just leave those in there and kind of treat them as snowdrifts, and that actually works for what it was. But in this day and age, if you were to do that, I think a lot of people would just assume that you're working with too low poly counts and you're trying to ask too much of the geometry, pulling it too far out, and you're ending with these kind of strange, kind of jagged areas here where that wouldn't be considered a very high quality terrain sculpt. So what we're going to do though is we're going to build snowdrifts into those, right? So those are still going to stay, but I'm just going to treat each one of these little areas here where they kind of pulled it out as a snowdrift. And we're going to add those kind of snowdrifts in that area. So you'll see right here, that was kind of where I wanted to test that whole idea right here. that was an incorrect place at that corner. Obviously, that's not going to work there. So we're going to have to slide these down, probably reduce the size of these snowdrifts, move them into that path, and keep going with that workflow. But I think that's going to work. I think if we alternate it between this cliff and that cliff, yeah, that'll add to the feeling of the entire little valley there. So that's that. We got our little texture here. Obviously, it's terrible quality, but that's a good preview texture to find out, to get a good feeling for whether, what that's going to look like. Really, this is just kind of testing the waters here, right? This is all we're doing, is kind of making sure that everything is gonna flow well. There aren't going to be any import problems. There aren't going to be any scale issues. Nail down what small issues you have now early in the process, so that way, as we move forward, we can minimize the amount of corrective action we have to take back into in our 3D package. So that's that. That's the UE preview. Alright, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Pretty highly technical. So for those of you that have an interest in this type of development, hopefully that quenched your thirst for details. Stay tuned for more, because that's exactly how I plan on going forward with this process. I kind of want to treat it like a video breakdown sheet of how I'm developing some of these assets. I think there's some utility in that, because I think during the process, if there's people that have recommendations about a certain feature maybe they want to see, or a certain type of asset they want to see integrated, they can make those recommendations. Kind of like the person that recommended that we have Oculus Rift support. That's an absolutely great idea, and I have access to a DK2. I've been using Oculus Rift for ever since the DK1, so it's pretty trivial to add it into Unreal and into Unity. And I absolutely agree. I would love to see Norath in VR. It would be an amazing experience, and it doesn't really honestly impact the project that much, because it's relatively trivial to just add VR support. The only part that it may impact is the interface design. So if I decide that I want to add, which I think I'm going to later on down the road, I'm going to add kind of the interface, at least on the 2D side for sure. And the interface, it will be non-functional. It's not like I'm recreating EQ the game. So I'll develop the interface for the 2D side, but then for Oculus Rift, it's got to be treated a little bit differently, because if you can imagine the Oculus Rift when you're viewing anything in VR, for those of you that haven't used VR, it's really it makes everything immense. It's easy to get a sense of scale inside of VR. So like, say you're in Everfrost Peaks, when you look up one of those cliffs, you're really going to see how immense those cliffs are, and there's really a sense of presence that you get that you can't replicate on a 2D screen. With that benefit comes some challenges, because when you're developing UI, if you think of UI as something like if you're just looking at the world around you and the regular world, if you can imagine a UI element all of a sudden just popping up in your field of view that's maybe as large as your body tall, and 10 times your body in width, just following you around, just right in your face, it's really inconvenient to look at, oh, I've got this menu over here that I'm trying to reach, right? So you've got to develop UIs with that in mind. So the UI that I come up with in Oculus Rift has to take that into consideration, and you have to integrate the user interface a little bit into the 3D environment in a creative way, because that's really jarring, right, to have that just right in your face. So that's, in terms of the way it's going to impact the project, that will definitely be a factor. But that's a bridge that we have a while to cross, and certainly even before I get to that part, I can certainly preview the 3D world in the Oculus Rift. So that's definitely coming. That's pretty much it. I just wanted to let you guys know that VR support's definitely in the back of my mind the whole time that I'm creating this. Again, for those of you that don't want the technical details, just look out for the videos, the EQ Redone zone presentation videos. Those will just be specifically for you. They won't go into the workflow and all of the stuff that we kind of go over in these technical videos. So just look out for that. Stay tuned to my Twitter feed, my website, this channel, however you want to do it. I don't want to make a Reddit post every single time I come up with a technical video. That's kind of pointless. So for those of you that are interested in following the project, just just pay attention to the channel. Probably my Twitter feed and my website will have more information. That's going to be kind of smaller updates. I'm not going to make a video every single move I make, obviously. So for the smaller updates to see where the project is, visit my website and take a look at my Twitter feed. That's it. Thanks for watching, and definitely stay tuned.